The wheels of the wagon groaned as Clara Whitman urged the old mare up the rocky slope, the late autumn wind tearing through her shawl like invisible claws. Every jolt rattled the crates of tools behind her, the hammer and saw clinking together in a rhythm that echoed her heartbeat, slow, steady, determined. The sun was sliding down behind the pines, washing the valley ahead in a coppery glow. She stopped on the ridge, pulled the reins, and simply looked. Below her lay the valley she had dreamed about for months, a wide basin hemmed by pine and cedar, a silver stream winding through the tall grass, and in the distance, a cluster of cottonwoods that shimmered in the dying light. It was quiet here, far quieter than any place she'd ever known. No gunfire, no shouting, no church bells, no wagons clattering down muddy streets. Just wind and the rustle of branches. Freedom had a sound, she thought, and this was it. She climbed down stiffly, her skirts catching on the wagon step. Her fingers were raw from the reins, her nails cracked and blackened from the trail. She was 32 and felt twice that. The war had taken everything: her husband Samuel, her small house in Tennessee, her laughter. When word of his death came, she'd sat for 2 days without moving, just staring at the wall until something in her had hardened like the winter ground. There was nothing left to lose, and that kind of emptiness could turn into strength if one let it. The land office clerk in Santa Fe had laughed when she said she was heading north alone. "A lady can't homestead out there," he'd said. "Apache country, wolves, worse things." She'd smiled, signed the papers anyway, and left him shaking his head. Men always said what women couldn't do, and she'd spent her whole life quietly proving them wrong. Now, standing on her claim, Clara unrolled the crude map and checked the markings. This was it: 200 acres of wild grass, pine, and rock, untouched by plow or fence. She would build here. She would start again. She gathered her hammer and hatchet, feeling their weight like familiar friends. The tools had belonged to Samuel, their handles smooth from his hands. She whispered to herself as she walked toward the stream, "We'll build it together, Sam. You'll see." The words caught in her throat. Half prayer, half promise. The stream was cold and quick, its surface broken by stones slick with moss. She knelt, cupped the water, and drank deeply. It tasted clean, better than any she'd known on the long trail west. She washed her face, feeling the dust of 1,000 miles drift away with the current. When she stood again, her reflection wavered in the water, a thin woman with sharp cheekbones, a sunburned neck, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Not beautiful, perhaps, but strong. Stronger than she'd ever been. She set to work before the light faded, driving a stake into the ground where the cabin's corner would stand. The sound of her hammer echoed through the trees. With each strike, she felt a piece of her fear splinter and fall away. This was her land now, her home dot by the time the sun slipped behind the ridge. She had marked the cabin's foundation and unpacked her bedroll beside the wagon. The fire crackled weakly, its smoke curling upward into the cooling air. She cooked a bit of salt pork and beans, whispering to the dark. "Tomorrow we start the walls." The mare snorted softly nearby, and the night settled heavy around, them thick with crickets and the faint howl of something far off. She did not see the figure on the ridge above her, the man. Watching quietly from the trees, he stood motionless, wrapped in a blanket of dark wool, his hair bound with rawhide. The firelight below glinted off the small metal charm that hung at his neck. Tahoma had been hunting deer when he saw the wagon earlier that day. At first, he thought it belonged to a family, perhaps settlers from the south. But when only one woman had climbed down, carrying her tools like a man and moving without fear, curiosity stirred in him. No woman came this far alone. No white woman, at least Dot he watched as she staked her claim, built her small fire and sat beneath the stars with her hands folded in her lap. There was sadness in her stillness, the kind of quiet that came from loss. Tahoma knew that quiet well. His wife, Ayana, and their child had died 2 winters past when the fever swept through the valley. Since then, the nights had been long and empty, the land silent in a way that even the wind could not fill. He turned away at last, vanishing into the trees like smoke. Below, Clara stirred the fire and stared into its embers, unaware of the eyes that had watched her, or the story that had just begun. For 3 days, Clara worked from dawn to dusk. The valley rang with the sound of her hammer striking wood, of her saw rasping through pine planks. Each morning, mist lifted off the stream and wrapped around her boots as she measured, cut and lifted, awkwardly at first, but steadier with each passing hour. The frame of the cabin began to rise, rough and uneven, yet unmistakably hers. She didn't know that she was being watched out from the cover of the trees on the northern ridge. Tahoma moved like shadow and wind, silent, unseen. He had meant only to watch once out of caution. But something in the sight of the woman's persistence drew him back again and again. He told himself it was to ensure she did not bring others, that she posed no threat to his people's hunting ground. But as the days passed, he realized it was more than that. She reminded him of Ayana. Not in her face. Ayana's eyes had been dark as obsidian, this woman's gray like river stones, but in her spirit. The same stubborn strength, the same quiet endurance. He saw her stumble, curse softly, then square her shoulders and lift again. He saw her kneel at the stream each morning to wash and whisper words he couldn't hear, perhaps to the dead. At night, her small fire flickered against the vast dark, a fragile circle of warmth in a wilderness that cared nothing for survival. Yet she stayed. He remembered when he had first built his own home, a wickiup of willow branches and hides, with Ayana singing softly as she tied the poles. They had laughed then, young and unbroken. Now that laughter was gone, carried away by the same fever that had taken so many. Sometimes, in the hush of evening, he still thought he heard the echo of his child's laugh on the wind, faint, fading, never close enough to touch. Watching the white woman below, Tahoma felt the ache of those memories stir again. It was not love, not yet, but something gentler, a recognition of another soul carrying grief like he did. One morning, as Clara was hauling a beam into place, her foot slipped on the mud. The beam fell, grazing her shoulder. She cried out and sank to her knees, breath ragged. From his perch, Tahoma tensed, half ready to go to her, but he stopped himself. A warrior did not interfere without cause. Still, he stayed there, watching as she sat in the dirt for a long while, hands trembling, before finally pulling herself up and setting the beam again. That night, the wind changed. It came down from the mountains, sharp and cold, carrying scents of pine sap and danger. Tahoma's ears caught a distant howl, wolves, close and hungry. He frowned. Wolves did not often hunt so near the valley, not unless driven by hunger. He knew what would happen. They would catch the smell of the woman's fire, her salted meat, her mare. He waited until the moon rose, a thin silver sliver above the trees, before slipping down from the ridge. Moving swiftly through the underbrush, he reached the edge of her clearing just as the first wolf appeared from the dark. Its eyes burned yellow, its breath steaming. 2 more shapes followed behind. Clara woke to the horse's terrified whinny. She grabbed the rifle, heart pounding, scanning the shadows. The fire had burned low, throwing more darkness than light. She could see movement, quick, low, circling. Wolves. Before she could aim, a sound cracked through the night, the whistle of an arrow. One of the wolves dropped silently into the grass. Another turned with a snarl, only to be struck by a second shaft. Clara froze. From the tree line, a tall figure stepped into the flickering light, silent, composed, a bow still drawn. The last wolf bolted. The man lowered his weapon and stood there a moment, outlined by moonlight. He was bareheaded, his long hair tied back, his chest marked by faint lines of paint. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable, then turned and vanished into the forest without a word. Clara stood for a long time, the rifle still raised. Her breath trembled in the cold air. She wanted to call out, to thank him, to demand who he was, but the words wouldn't come by morning. All that remained were the Wolf tracks, the broken shafts of 2 arrows, and a small bundle of kindling stacked neatly beside her fire. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered to the empty trees, "Thank you." High above, hidden once more among the pines, Tahoma watched her lift the bundle and smile, the first real smile he had seen from her. He felt something ease within him, a warmth that hadn't touched his heart in years. He turned his face toward the dawn and murmured softly in his own tongue, "Perhaps the spirits have not forgotten me after all." The days that followed were warmer, calmer, as if the valley itself had drawn a deep breath and exhaled peace. The snow on the mountain peaks glimmered under a pale sun, and the air smelled of thawing pine and wet earth. Clara rose early, as always, but her work carried a strange new energy. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The arrows, the wolves, the silent figure who had appeared and vanished like a dream. All of it felt both impossible and inevitable. There had been stories told in the towns she'd passed about the Apache who roamed these lands, fierce and proud. Some tales spoke of raids and bloodshed, others of men who moved like shadows, never seen until it was too late. But the man who had stood by her fire that night had not looked cruel. His face, lit by the flames, had been calm, watchful, alive with something she could not name. She found herself glancing toward the tree line often, half expecting to see him again. She never did. But she felt him, somehow. A prickle on her skin, the faint rustle of branches where no wind moved. The sense that she was no longer entirely alone. At first, the idea unnerved her. Yet as the days passed, unease turned to a quiet comfort. It was strange how quickly one could get used to invisible company. The wolves did not return, and she slept better. Still, she left a small portion of her supper near the edge of the clearing each night, a gesture of gratitude, though she told herself it was only for the stray fox she sometimes heard. One morning she woke to find the plate empty, but her woodpile neatly stacked and covered against the dew. Clara smiled. "Well," she murmured to the empty forest, "thank you again, whoever you are." Up on the ridge, Tahoma heard her words carried faintly on the breeze. He smiled too, though she could not see it. He had kept his distance since that night. It was not wise to draw too near. The woman was strong, but she was also white, and her people were not kind to his. Yet he felt drawn to her clearing again and again. Each time he promised himself it would be the last. And each time he broke that promise by sunset. He began to leave small things when she wasn't looking. A bundle of dry kindling after rain, a sharpened stake left beside her half-built fence, once even a rabbit cleaned and ready for her pot. He meant it as repayment for the sense of peace she had somehow returned to him. It had been many moons since he'd felt something other than emptiness. Watching her brought a strange kind of stillness to his heart, as if the noise of grief quieted in her presence. One afternoon, Clara decided to repay the kindness. She baked a small loaf of bread in the coals, coarse, made from the last of her flour. When it cooled, she wrapped it carefully in cloth and placed it near the edge of the woods, where she'd found the firewood before. She lingered there a moment, looking into the dark, and said softly, "For the one who helped me." Then she turned and walked back to her cabin. Not daring to look over her shoulder, Tahoma approached only when the shadows grew long. He crouched by the offering, touched the warm cloth, and smelled the faint scent of wheat and smoke. Bread. His people had traded for such food before, but never had one been made for him. The gesture struck him more deeply than he expected. He looked toward her cabin, the small, sturdy frame now standing proud against the pale sky, and felt the stir of something he had not felt since. Ayana's laughter filled his home, belonging. The next morning, when Clara stepped outside, she found something new resting where the bread had been, a small string of beads, polished smooth and strung on a strip of leather. Red, white, and black stones that glowed faintly in the sun. She picked it up, her throat tightening. It was beautiful, simple, but made with care. She turned it over in her hands, knowing exactly what it meant. A gift for a gift. A truce, perhaps. Or something deeper, a wordless understanding. Between two souls who had lost too much. Clara tied the beads around her wrist and whispered, "Then we are friends. You and I." In the forest, unseen but listening, Tahoma's lips curved into the faintest smile. He touched the metal charm at his neck, the one that had belonged to his late wife, and murmured in his tongue, "Dadilnish, we are not alone anymore." The wind carried the words down through the trees, over the stream, and into the clearing where Clara stood, and though she did not understand the language, she somehow felt their meaning. That night, as she sat by her fire, the valley no longer felt quite so large or lonely. The snow had melted from the valley's edges, leaving behind soft earth and 1,000 tiny streams that whispered through the grass. Spring had come quietly, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what the season would bring. For Clara, it brought both peace and uncertainty. The cabin stood, rough but strong. Its roof no longer leaked, and its hearth burned bright each evening. She'd planted a small garden patch near the stream and built a corral for the mar. Yet even with her work finished, she often found herself glancing toward the woods, wondering if the eyes she'd felt for so long still watched. The gifts had stopped coming. No more wood bundles, no more sharpened stakes or fresh game. The silence addled her more than she cared to admit. "Maybe he's gone," she said one morning aloud, though no one could hear. "Or maybe he thinks I don't care." She looked down at the bead bracelet still tied around her wrist. The leather had worn soft from her skin, and the stones caught the light like embers. No, she cared. More than she ought to. It was nearing dusk when the moment finally came. She was gathering water from the stream, her skirts hitched to keep dry, when a branch cracked softly behind her. The sound froze her. Slowly, she turned. He stood a few paces away, tall and motionless, his bow slung across his shoulder. The last light of the setting sun brushed his face, the same face she'd seen only once before, half shadowed by firelight. For a long moment neither moved. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to say something, anything, but her throat was tight. Her words caught between fear and awe. He broke the silence first. "You are still here." His voice was deep, careful, accented but clear. "Yes," she managed after a pause. "I am." He looked past her toward the cabin. "You build alone?" "I do." She straightened, meeting his gaze. "And you watch?" A flicker of surprise, then amusement, passed across his eyes. "I watch." Clara's hands trembled slightly, but she forced them still. "Why?" He hesitated, searching for the words. "Because you do not run." He gestured toward the valley. "Others come. They fear. They take. Then they leave. But you stay." There was no accusation in his tone, only quiet wonder. "I came to make a home," she said softly. "And I've nowhere else to go." The two of them stood in silence again, the stream murmuring between them. "I know who you are," Clara said finally, her voice steady now. "You're Apache." He inclined his head, not denying it. "Tahoma," he said simply, touching his chest. She nodded. "Clara." Her name sounded different on his tongue, slower, careful, almost reverent. "Clara," he repeated, as if testing its shape in his mouth. He studied her a moment longer, then said, "You are far from your people." "They aren't my people anymore," she answered. "Not since the war." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "You lost." "Yes," she said quietly. "You too, I think." The way he looked at her then told her she was right. The air between them shifted, no longer wary, no longer strange. Just two souls standing on either side of the same wound. Tahoma stepped closer, slowly as one might approach a wild animal. He held something in his hand, a single white feather, long and delicate. "Peace," he said simply, offering it. Clara reached out, hesitated, then took it. Their fingers brushed, the briefest touch, warm and electric. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned to leave. "Wait," she called after him. "Will you come again?" He paused at the edge of the trees. "If you wish, I do." He looked back, and for the first time she saw him smile, faint but real. Then he disappeared into the forest, silent as mist. Clara stood there long after he was gone. The feather clutched to her chest, her heart beating faster than it had in years. When she returned to her cabin, she placed the feather above the hearth, where it caught the light of the flames and shimmered like a promise. That night, as the wind brushed through the pines, she dreamed, not of loss, but of new beginnings, and far up the ridge, Tahoma watched the soft glow of her fire through the trees and whispered to the darkness, "Perhaps this valley will know laughter again." The wind came first, sharp, restless, whispering warnings through the pine needles. Then the clouds rolled over the mountains like bruises spreading across the sky. Clara felt it in her bones before the first thunder cracked. The storm was coming. She'd seen weather on the plains before, but never like this, not in the narrow valley where sound echoed and light split the air as if the heavens themselves were breaking open. By late afternoon, the horizon had turned an ominous green-gray, and the mare paced the corral nervously, nostrils flaring. Clara worked fast. She tied down the canvas covering her supplies, shuttered the small window, and stacked more wood beside the hearth. The roof creaked under the first gusts. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of rain and pine sap. "Hold together," she whispered to the cabin walls. "Please, just hold." By dusk, the storm hit with a fury that shook the earth. The wind screamed through the gaps in the logs, and the rain fell in blinding sheets. The cabin shuddered as if alive, each gust slamming against it like the blow of a giant's hand. Clara pressed her shoulder against the door, fighting to keep it from tearing open. The latch rattled, the hinges groaned. Somewhere above her, part of the roof lifted with a sickening crack. She could hear the nails screaming free, one by one. A flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a boom that shook her to her core. The mare whinnied in terror. Clara's heart twisted. The corral wouldn't hold in this. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl, threw it over her head, and pushed out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her from her feet. Rain stung her eyes, the world reduced to chaos, wind, water, and the deafening roar of thunder. She stumbled toward the corral, shouting over the storm. The mare's eyes rolled white in panic. Clara fumbled with the gate, her fingers numb and slick. "Easy, girl, easy," she cried, but her voice vanished into the howling night. She didn't see the figure approach through the rain until he was almost upon her. "Clara." The voice was deep, urgent, and familiar. She turned, blinking through the downpour, and saw him. Tahoma, drenched, his hair plastered to his face, his blanket whipping in the wind. "What are you doing here?" She shouted, though relief flooded her. "The storm came fast," he called back. "You cannot fight it alone." Together they forced the mare into the lee of the cabin, tying her close to the wall where the wind hit less fiercely. Then Tahoma turned his attention to the roof. "The wind will take it," he said grimly. Clara followed his gaze. The corner of the roof was lifting again, the wooden beam beneath it trembling. "I'll climb," she said. But he stopped her with a hand on her arm. "No, inside." "But inside." There was no time to argue. She stumbled back into the cabin, dragging in armfuls of wet firewood. Moments later, Tahoma appeared through the doorway, soaked to the bone, carrying a heavy log. He jammed it against the door as a brace and turned to her. His face lit briefly by another flash of lightning. They worked in silence, patching leaks with whatever they could, hides, cloth, even a scrap of her old shawl. The wind roared like a living thing, trying to claw its way in. The cabin groaned, but it held Dot at last. When the worst of it passed, they sank to the floor, breathless and shaking. Rain still hissed on the roof, but the thunder had moved farther down the valley. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled weakly, throwing pale light across the walls. Water dripped from their hair, pooling on the floorboards. Clara looked at him, really looked. His face was cut by exhaustion, his clothes torn, his hands raw. He had risked himself for her. Again. "You came," she said softly. He met her eyes. "A storm would have taken your roof." "It might have," she admitted. "Or me." He gave a small nod. "You are stubborn." "You've noticed," she said, smiling faintly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, too. "Yes." They sat in the quiet that followed, the kind of silence that speaks more than words ever could. When the firelight flickered across the feather above the hearth, Clara reached up and touched it. "You said it meant peace," she whispered. He nodded. "Peace between us, between what is gone and what remains." She looked at him, the warmth of the fire reflected in her gray eyes. "Then stay tonight, until the storm passes." Tahoma hesitated, then nodded once. Outside, the rain softened to a steady whisper. Inside, two souls, both marked by loss, both hardened by solitude, sat close beside the fire, listening not to the storm, but to the quiet rhythm of their breathing. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel the emptiness pressing in from every side. She felt the warmth of another presence, solid, steady. Real. And when the wind finally died and dawn began to pale the horizon, the cabin still stood, and so did the fragile bond between them. When morning came, the world was washed clean. The storm had torn branches from the pines and filled the stream to its banks, but the air smelled new, wet earth, cedar, and smoke from the cabin's chimney curling gently into the pale sky. Clara stirred the fire, still feeling the ache in her arms from the night's struggle. Across from her, Tahoma knelt by the doorway, checking the damage. His movements were quiet, precise, the way a man works when his hands know the land. "You held the walls," he said after a while, glancing back at her. "They did not fall." She smiled faintly. "You mean we held them?" He inclined his head, the ghost of a smile touching his mouth. "Yes, we." They spent the morning repairing what the storm had broken. He replaced a beam near the roof, showing her how to bind it with sap-soaked rope so it wouldn't split. She worked beside him, handing tools, matching his rhythm. There was an ease between them now. Born from danger survived. By midday the cabin stood firm again, and the wind had died to a whisper through the trees. When the work was done, they sat outside beneath the eaves, sharing what little food she had left, dried beans, a bit of bread and water from the stream. Tahoma ate little, out of courtesy, though she pressed him to take more. "You did half the work," she said. "At least eat like it." He chuckled softly, a deep, quiet sound that startled her in its warmth. "You command like a chief." She raised an eyebrow. "And you follow like one who's used to women telling him what to do." His smile deepened. "Ihana was like that." The name hung between them for a moment, fragile as the first note of a song. Clara looked up. "Your wife?" He nodded slowly. She and our son. Gone 3 winters now. I'm sorry. He didn't look at her, only stared toward the far ridge where the pines met the sky. Fever came with the traders. Nothing we could do. I buried them near the river where the cottonwoods grow. When the leaves turn yellow, I go there to remember. Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. Her own loss rose up in her like a tide. The telegram, the empty bed, the silence that had followed. I lost my husband, she said quietly. The war took him. Back east. They said it was quick, but I never believed that. He was brave, and brave men rarely die easy. Tahoma looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them. Wordless but deep. You came here for him, he said. I came here because I couldn't live where everything reminded me of him, she admitted. I thought if I built something new, maybe the pain would fade. But it doesn't fade, it just changes shape. He nodded, understanding. Like the river after rain. Still the same, but different. They fell into silence. The afternoon light softened, and the forest filled with the sounds of life returning, birds calling, the stream laughing over stones. Clara watched the sunlight dance on the ripples and felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Peace, fragile but real. When evening came, Tahoma built a fire just outside the cabin. They sat near it, close enough to feel the warmth, but not so close that the flames blinded their view of the sky. The stars came out one by one, sharp and bright against the blackness. He began to hum, a low melodic sound that rose and fell like wind over the hills. A song without words. Clara listened, spellbound. What is it? She asked softly. A song for the dead, he said, and for the living who remember them. She didn't speak again. She only listened. The music was both mournful and soothing, as if it stitched together the torn edges of her heart. When he stopped, she whispered, It's beautiful. He turned to her, his face half lit by firelight. The fire burns for both, he said, for what we lost and what we may still find. Clara met his gaze, steady, dark, searching, and felt the air between them shift. The crackle of the fire was the only sound, but the silence was rich, full of unspoken things. For the first time, she didn't look away, and in that small glowing circle of light, surrounded by the whispering pines and the vastness of the valley, 2 hearts, once shattered by grief, began to find their rhythm again. The peace of the valley did not last. It never does, not where men's greed and fear find their way. It began with the smoke, thin, distant, curling from beyond the ridge. Clara saw it first while tending her garden, the hoe pausing mid-stroke. It wasn't wildfire smoke. This was different, heavier, tainted with the smell of iron and oil. She knew what it meant. Settlers. By sundown, the sound of voices carried faintly through the trees. Coarse laughter, the bark of a dog, the clang of metal on stone. Clara's stomach tightened. Tahoma arrived not long after, his expression grave. I saw them, he said quietly. 4 men. They came with horses and rifles. They made camp near the river. She set down her hoe. Trappers? He shook his head. No, they marked trees. They look for land. Clara's pulse quickened. This land's mine. I claimed it fair from the office in Santa Fe. Tahoma's gaze hardened, though not at her. They do not care what paper you carry. He looked toward the ridge where the smoke rose. They will see your cabin. And they will see me. Clara followed his eyes, realizing what he didn't say aloud, that the settlers might not come to talk. Not to her, and certainly not to an Apache. What will you do? She asked. He was silent for a moment. If they harm you, I will stop them. And if they don't, then I will still watch. She stepped closer. Tahoma, if they find you, they will find me only if I wish it. There was steel in his voice. but something softer, too, the weight of someone who had seen too much blood already. For 2 days, the men didn't approach. They stayed near the river, cutting wood, laughing, drinking. Clara saw their fires flicker at night and prayed they would move on. But prayers, like smoke, rarely stay where they're sent. On the 3rd morning, the sound of hooves shattered the valley's calm. 2 riders appeared on the trail, rough men with rifles slung low. They halted near the garden, their eyes sweeping over the cabin, over Clara herself. "Well, look at here," one said, spitting tobacco. "Didn't think we'd find a woman all the way out here." Clara wiped her hands on her skirt, forcing calm into her voice. "This is my land. I have the claim papers inside." The man grinned. "Ain't no paper that matters out here, ma'am. This valley's open for the taking." "It isn't," she said firmly. "Now you turn around and—" He laughed, cutting her off. "Easy now. We're just saying hello." His companion snickered, eyes crawling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. She stood her ground. "You've said it. Now go." The man's grin faded. "You got a husband?" "I did." He tilted his head. "Then you don't anymore." Before Clara could answer, the forest itself seemed to move. A figure stepped from the trees, tall, silent, the sun glinting off the blade at his hip. Tahoma. His presence was like the sudden drop in air before lightning strikes. The men spun around, cursing. "Apache!" One shouted, reaching for his rifle. Tahoma's voice was calm, low, but it carried. "Leave this valley." The man sneered. "Ain't your valley, Redskin." In the heartbeat that followed, time slowed. The rifle lifted, but Tahoma was faster. His hand struck the weapon aside, the other driving the man backward into the dirt. The second rider drew his pistol, but Clara, heart-pounding, raised her own rifle, Samuel's rifle, and leveled it at him. "Don't," she said. Her voice didn't shake. He froze, eyes darting between her and the warrior beside her. Tahoma's blade glinted once in the light, not in blood, but in warning. The message was clear. The first man staggered to his feet, his pride bruised more than his body. "You'll regret this," he spat, backing toward his horse. "Ain't the last you'll see of us." Clara didn't lower her rifle. "Then you best make sure it is." The 2 men mounted and rode off, shouting curses that faded into the distance. When they were gone, Clara's hands began to shake. She lowered the rifle and turned to Tahoma. "They'll come back." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." She looked up at him, her breath still uneven. "We," he met her gaze. "This is your home. But it is my valley, and I will not see it taken again." Something in his tone left no room for doubt. He wasn't speaking only of land. That night, they kept watch together by the fire. 2 shadows side by side, facing whatever might come, not out of fear, but out of choice. In the glow of the flames, Clara felt something stir deep inside her, not just gratitude or friendship, but the fierce, unmistakable pull of belonging. She glanced at him, his face half lit, eyes distant but steady. "Tahoma?" He turned. "Yes?" She hesitated. Then softly, "If they come again, I'll fight beside you." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then they will not take what is ours." And somewhere in the night, thunder rumbled again, not from a storm this time, but from the turning of fate. Spring ripened into summer, and with it came the slow healing of the valley. The air grew heavy with the scent of wild sage and sun-warmed grass. The river ran clear again, thick with trout, and the hillsides were alive with birdsong. The scars of the storm, and of what had come after, faded beneath new growth. The men never returned. For a few weeks, Clara feared they might. She kept Samuel's rifle loaded by the door and a knife under her pillow. but the threat dissolved into rumor and memory. Tahoma said word must have spread that the valley was watched, guarded by something unseen and unyielding. Perhaps they thought it cursed. Perhaps they were right. Through those quiet months, life found its rhythm again. Clara's cabin, once small and fragile, began to change. Together, she and Tahoma rebuilt it, tearing away the weak timbers, setting new ones with care. His hands, steady and sure, taught her how to bind logs with rawhide, how to fit stones to strengthen the hearth. Hers, once blistered and uncertain, learned to measure, smooth, and mend. They spoke little as they worked. Words weren't needed. Each swing of the hammer, each shared glance, said enough. Sometimes he would hum softly as they labored, those same low, winding melodies that seemed older than the valley itself. Clara never understood the words when he sang them, but she understood the meaning. Life goes on. No matter how deeply it has been broken by midsummer, the cabin stood finished, broader now, with a porch shaded by pine boughs and a smokehouse near the stream. Its roof gleamed with fresh-cut bark. Its walls were solid, straight. When the last beam was set, they stood side by side, looking at what they had made. "It is strong," Tahoma said. Clara smiled. "So are we." He turned to her then, and for a moment, neither of them looked at the cabin. They simply looked at each other, at all they had endured, all they had rebuilt not just in wood and stone, but within themselves. Tahoma reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against the bead bracelet still circling her wrist. The colors had faded a little, but it was still beautiful, still a promise. "This," he said quietly, "was gift for friendship." He hesitated. "Now I give it new meaning." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And what meaning is that?" He met her eyes, steady and clear. "Family." The word struck her with the soft weight of something she hadn't dared to hope for. For so long she had lived with ghosts, her husband, his wife, their children unborn or gone. But now, in this wild, quiet valley, something new had taken root, not to replace what was lost, but to grow beside it. She stepped closer. "Then we'll build it together," she said, "not just the cabin, but the life that would fill it." That night, they lit a fire in the new hearth. The flames burned steady, the smoke curling up through the roof's vent into the starlit sky. Outside, the forest murmured its approval. The wind through the needles, the distant call of an owl. Clara sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. The warmth of the fire touched their faces, softening the lines time had carved there. "I used to think I came here to be alone," she said. "But maybe the land was only waiting for both of us." Tahoma's eyes were on the flames. "The spirits bring who they choose," he said. "Sometimes, even across great sorrow." She nodded, feeling tears she did not try to hide. "Then let this be our home. Yours and mine." He reached into the pouch at his side and drew out a small carving, 2 figures. Side by side, their hands joined, shaped from river wood. He placed it on the mantel. "So the fire will remember us," he said. Clara smiled through her tears. "Then it will burn bright for a long time." Outside, dawn began to touch the peaks with gold. Smoke rose from the chimney, winding upward into the morning air, the first sign, perhaps, that this valley, once silent and haunted, now held laughter again, and as the sun climbed higher, its light poured through the cabin window, spilling across 2 figures sitting close beside the fire, no longer widow and warrior, no longer lost souls, but a family reborn, built from ashes and love, in the heart of a land that had learned to hold them both.